Okay. Okay, so welcome to History Matters, and I'm not going to hold up my coffee cup, and so does coffee. I'm Joanne Freeman, for those of you who are new. And today, as advertised on Twitter and Facebook, we're going to be talking about hope. I decided on this topic before all of the events of the last week had unfolded, but of course, in our current news climate, every day brings new things to think about. So although it's a daunting topic, it's a challenging topic, it's a really important topic, and it's even more important now. So hopefully some of what I'm going to say this morning will be helpful to everybody. But before I launch into that, it is time to hear from my partner in crime, Matt, who is going to tell us the rules of the game for how things work this morning.
And hello, everybody. Welcome. And if this is your first time, especially warm welcome. Rules of the game for this particular conversation that we have weekly is really very simple. I want you to please use chat. Please tell us where you're at, and sometimes folks tell us where the weather is, what the weather is, and we love that. And make sure you use chat to have good conversations that are, of course, family friendly and clean and all that good stuff, germane to what we're talking about. If you do have questions, however, please make sure you put them in Q&A. We use the Q&A to filter the questions at the end. So don't put them in chat, put them in Q&A. And we will try to get to as many questions at the end as possible and have a nice conversation about hope today. And as always, if you like what we do here at the National Council for History Education, please make sure to become a member. You can go to our new URL, which is www.ncheteach.org, and click join. You can also peruse our new website and look at all the good stuff that we do. Watch old webinars, and you can access every episode of History Matters, and so does Coffee, from our new website. So hopefully you can do that. You can also join us on social media. On Twitter, we're at HistoryEd, and at Facebook, we are, NC4HE. If you just like our page, we'd love to connect with you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Joanne, and we're going to have a great conversation today.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we now turn to hope, which for those of you who were not here at the very beginning, when I referenced hope and the need to talk about hope, I was not talking about President Obama, and I was not trying to be political. I'm actually talking about hope. So as I said at the outset, in a way, this is counterintuitive given the events of last week. I'm actually going to boop. That a little better, so I'm not falling off your screen. So much happened in such a short amount of time. I think it's hard not to despair. I think despairing is natural. I think we're all either despairing or anxious or worried or whatever your favorite form of angst is. We're all in that moment because of, and I've said this before, we're in such a moment of extreme contingency. But I think, and I'm going to make a statement here, I'm going to repeat it, and then I'm going to back it up, I think, by what I say this morning. I think in the end, the absence of hope hurts the health of democracy. And I'm going to repeat that. The absence of hope hurts the health of democracy. And I'm going to talk about that and explain that and then come back around that to the end. Now, part of my job here on History Matters has been, amidst all of the entwined crises that we've been experiencing, to really encourage us to stay informed, to stay engaged, to be smart about what's happening, to let the past teach us how to study the present moment, to help us understand what questions might be useful to ask, definitely to help us evaluate what's before our eyes, how to evaluate evidence. And we have been doing this together since April 9th. April 9th was the first History Matters. This is the 25th episode of History Matters, which is quite amazing. And as Matt said, before I go on, all of the past episodes are archived at the place you went to tune in this week, ncheteach.org/conversations, if you want to catch up. Now, looking back at the history of what we've been talking about, You've certainly heard me talk about contingency many, many times. And as a matter of fact, the first History Matters, that was the main subject, was contingency, and how vital contingency is, the understanding that people at the time didn't know what would happen, that events could change, how fundamental to understanding history that idea of contingency is. People live forward in time, right? We're looking back in time, and it's very easy to forget the fact that history unfolds in a manner that people can't always predict. To understand history, we need to remember that, and I'll come back to this at the end, to understand the present moment and to think about it in a useful way. That's also something that is really important to remember. And if you'll cast your mind back, that first episode of History Matters, my example of contingency is a document that I love because it's so unexpected and it's such an extreme example of this, and it's from Alexander Hamilton. It's written not that long after the Constitutional Convention. He goes home and he does what appears to be a sort of lawyerly reasoning document for himself. What do I think is going to happen next? And he starts out saying, well, maybe Washington will be president, and if he does, he'll probably appoint good people, and people will trust those people, and people will thus trust the government, and maybe this will be good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he goes on to say, well, what if all of that doesn't happen? I don't know, what if Washington isn't president, or what if people don't trust the government? And then he creates this kind of apocalyptic scenario about states will turn against each other, foreign nations will sweep in and take control of some of the states. And the kicker in this, and this thing that screams contingency, is this guy who worked so hard to push for that Constitutional Convention just got out of it with a document created, not yet ratified. He says at the end of this apocalyptic description, that's probably what's going to happen. And I love that document because think about that, right? Think about the fact that he really finishes working on the Constitution, is ready to launch into the Federalist essays, the Federalist Papers, to advertise what's great about it, to get people to ratify the Constitution. And he's saying, I don't know if this is really going to work. I kind of don't think it will. So the contingency of that is important. But what's equally important there is, although he's actually predicting something bad will probably happen, that's not the moment when he stops, right? He doesn't conclude that and then say, oh, well, there's no hope. That is not what he does. He doesn't necessarily use the word hope, but he realizes bad things may happen and pushes really hard for what he wants to happen. Now, we haven't necessarily gone into great detail here about Hamilton's views, but the fact of the matter is what he wanted to happen is not necessarily what many other people wanted to happen, and he was not entirely comfortable with democracy, so he's not necessarily the ideal character for a variety of reasons in this conversation. But the fact that he said this is probably going to collapse, and now I will launch an intensive effort to get it passed, and then I will ultimately, he has a seat in the cabinet, and he uses that position to continue pushing for what he wants. So he sees, he could have despaired, he predicts disaster, and he keeps on going. He keeps on fighting. So he, like many others, and I know I've talked about the 1790s a lot as a moment of extreme contingency, when a lot of people thought that the government could collapse at any moment, the next disaster, and it's all going down. People didn't see that, predict disaster, acknowledge it was very possible for everything to fall apart, and then sit back and say, oh, well, it was a good try. That really fueled action. Now, granted, it also fueled extreme emotion, of which we have plenty, but it did fuel many people to push for what they thought was right, to defend what they thought was good and useful for the country. It pushed people to take action. So hope is kind of, as I said at the outset, it's kind of a fuel for democracy. It's a fuel for action. It's a fuel for upholding and defending something that's in peril. And I want to stop here for a moment and say, by hope here, I mean a lot more than a sort of vague, amorphous kind of faith, right? I mean the very real belief that you, and as a matter of fact, that we, and I'm going to come back to that very important word, we, in a bit, that we can shape outcomes, that we can shape positive outcomes, that we can do that even now, right? Hope as the possibility to create positive change. Hope as the possibility of pushing for things to be better and possibly achieving that. Hope as not caving into hopelessness, despair, and just sitting down and accepting what's happening. That is not a friend to democracy. So hope is an engine. It fuels action, and in that sense, it fuels democracy, which makes a lot of sense. If you think about, on a fundamental level, just democratic government, any democracy, they're not about set outcomes by definition, right? Democracies are about the public, through some kind of structured process, making their voice known and having that voice count. It's about contests and debate and compromise and outcomes not being known in advance and people having faith in the process as being able to sift through conflicting opinions, and that the final opinion that appears through votes matters, reflects the popular will, and if you don't like it, well, there's going to be another contest coming along really soon where you can register that as well. Democracy is a contest. It's not about set outcomes, and debate and compromise are its tools and kind of its rules. And when a democracy fails to live up to its ideals or its realities, what it should be, when it seems to be surrendering to something that is really not what democracy is, democratic ideals, the ones not being met, can be really powerful weapons for marginalized people to use against the system to assert and demand their own rights. On so many levels, democracy is empowering. Democracy is about contest. Democracy thus relies on hope that you can shape the outcome you want. Now, I hardly need to say that we are not currently at a moment of debate and compromise. The constitutional process itself in many ways is under attack. And I'm going to be blunt and say democratic government is in peril. I know a lot of people are saying that now. I think it needs to be said, and I think it needs to be believed, because I think we have to take that seriously in order to think seriously about what's happening, about what we can do about this moment, and how we should act in it, and what will be helpful in this moment. And denying it or dismissing it or belittling it is not going to be helpful. Now, that said, it's really important to note that we've seen a lot of threats. We have not seen the carrying out of threats when it comes to the overturn of our system of government. We have not. I'm going to come back to that point shortly. But that's a really, really important point. What we're seeing now is bullying and threats. And we need to remember that. What we're seeing now is an attempt to intimidate people into shutting up and sitting down because, oh, well, it's over. And that's not the case. So, but I will come back to that shortly. Okay, so let's turn to history for a moment, since that's what we do on Thursday mornings. What can history tell us about this moment? How can it help us? And I think in part, it teaches that not just being true to a cause, but demonstrating your willingness to be true to that cause, publicly declaring that before others and living up to that declaration matters. So I think it's not enough for you in your heart to say, I shall fight for democracy. I think the we of we the people matters a lot, right? We say we the people and it's like a rote phrase, and I think we focus more on the people than we, but the we part means something, because you really have to believe that you're part of a we. You have to believe that you're part of a larger whole, and you have to feel a connection with other people to really uphold democracy. It's just a fact that the we matters. And I think thinking about that fact and thinking about the fact that we are not all isolated beings alone in this moment, but that although we might not see it every day, although there might be some opinions that get more play or press than others, the fact of the matter is we're not alone. And there are many people who agree with whatever it is that you're thinking. So this is not a moment when things have been decided, and it's not a moment when we're all little isolated atoms of hopelessness. And I want to offer a few concrete examples in history of people making that point. And the first one I realize is kind of a cliche, but it's the first thing that jumped into my head this morning when I was sitting down and really reckoning with what I wanted to say. Thomas Paine. And in a sense, it's 2-3 sentences that are a we in the making, right? It's about we are a we, and let's reckon with that fact and act. So it's from The American Crisis, which comes out in December of 1776. It was read aloud to the Continental Army on December 23rd, 1776, 3 days before what becomes the Battle of Trenton, in the hope that it would bolster morale and resistance among patriots, and ideally shame neutrals and loyalists to support the cause, because they would see that we, right? They would see that there are people gathering together with a cause. So here are the handful of sentences that I wanted to quote. And you will recognize them, I know. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country, but he, and I'll add she, that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. So what is he saying there? He's saying, yes, times are hard, but particularly when times are hard, it's important at that moment to stand by your country, to stand by its ideals. It matters that you do that. You matter that you do that. You can help shape outcomes. More important than that, we, as a we, being aware of the fact that there's force in numbers, we can have an impact, and hope will fuel the action that will get us to having some kind of an impact. Hope is the fuel. Hope is the start. Hope is what we really need to maintain hold of. There's another kind of idea about this, about creating a we, and people standing behind that we is a way to say, look, we're not defeated yet. We're a we, we're going to fight. That takes place, appropriately enough, in the election of 1800, the presidential election of 1800. Highly polarized election, fear on both sides that the other side is going to somehow illicitly seize control of this election, seize the government. The first transmission of power from one party to another. People wonder if that's going to work. Very high stakes. One thing that power holders did in that moment, congressmen took a mutual pledge. They actually met in groups, a Federalist group, a Republican group of congressmen met, and they took a pledge, a mutual pledge, a real pledge, in which they promised that they would be true to the cause of their party, that they would stand behind the two candidates that their party was going to put forward. Now that was necessary partly because there weren't structured parties and there wasn't party discipline. And so people couldn't assume that parties were somehow or other going to just click into place and people would do what they were told. They had to take this sort of public pledge to convince each other that there was a we, and we were going to stand behind our candidates. And as the contest went on, people reminded each other about that moment. You remember the pledge we took? We're standing firm. It created a we. It created a group that people understood was there. And that idea, that sensibility gave people hope, right? Continued to push people to fight. And for those who were kind of maybe wanting to become a little cowardly and not do what they perhaps should have done, it was a little bit of a push. Yeah, well, you know, you said X. You're going to do X because that matters. So we, the fact that they're a part of a we, matters. It can foster hope, and hope is necessary for a functioning democracy. Now, I've been talking a lot about that one word. I have said we far too many times. It connects us to another frequent topic on History Matters. I've said it many times, and that is Words matter, right? I say that, I don't say it maybe every week, but I talk about it a lot. Just last week, we were talking about words mattering. And at this particular moment, there are a lot of words being tossed around sort of deliberately without meaning. And I'm going to just throw a lot of them out here and then come back. Nazi, Nazism, authoritarianism, fascism, socialism, they're all isms, right? And these words are being used kind of deliberately without meaning as clubs, right? Well, they're whatever. They're Nazis, they're authoritarian, you're fascist, you're socialist. And the point of the way these words are being used is actually to not focus really hard on what they really mean, or alternately, people don't really know what they really mean. They have a vague sense of what fascism is or authoritarianism is. And I think I keep meaning to write something about the fact that words are getting in the way of understanding the moment, because people don't necessarily grasp what these words really mean, and they just get sucked in, as I've said many a time, by the emotion of the charge and aren't really thinking about what those words mean and the fact that they may or may not apply, or that they apply better to one side than the other. So I think some isms have been getting in the way or have been less than useful. That said, there is a word that I'm going to say now that I think needs to be said. And I kind of hate to say it. I said in a tweet last night, I made a tweet about this and said I would remember feeling the need to make this tweet for a very long time. The word is coup. Coup d'etat. Dictionary definition. A coup is the illegal, often violent removal of an existing government from power. Typically, it is an unconstitutional seizure of power by a political faction, the military, or a dictator. Now, as I said before, we have not suffered a coup. We have not. We've been threatened with one. We have not been exposed to one. We should use that word coup because it's on point. I mean, it describes what was threatened, right? Well, I mean, if we can sort of discount some of the votes and not really focus on the election, then things will just kind of stay as they are. Okay, that's a soft way of describing an illicit taking over of the government, and coup is the word to use for that. It's a threat, it's a big threat, but it's only a threat. So the word is important because I think it will drive home the importance of this moment. It's also important because it's tempting to see that as a given or as something that's in the process of happening. Not yet, not yet. And for that very reason, all of the things I'm talking about this morning matter that much more. I want to quote in relation to this. A lot of you I know the book by my colleague, Tim Snyder, on tyranny, in which he talks about ways to react in this kind of crisis that are helpful. And one of the things he says is, do not obey in advance. Quote, anticipatory obedience is a political tragedy. And I'll say that again. Anticipatory obedience is a political tragedy, right? We should not assume outcomes before they happen. We should remember contingency. We should remember the fact that things are in the process. We should remember the fact that we as a we matter. We should remember the fact that words matter. We should understand the fact that hope is vital to democracy, and that we as a group can enforce and encourage and create a sense of hope that will lead to action and to an unwillingness to simply sit down and accept what's happening. Now, one of the things that's essential to note about our government, and I think it's easy to overlook, and I know I've said this many times before, and it's hardly a surprise, is that public opinion in our form of government, public opinion is the absolute heart of the nation. Public opinion determines where power goes and who has power. And although it feels like, you know, we sit at home and watch whatever channel of news we prefer to watch, or we read whatever newspaper we prefer to read, and it's tempting to think like, oh, these things are happening and there's no way to control them. But I'll remind you that there's been more than one moment when people have put up enough of a stink in a big public way to cause backpedaling. Think about the USPS and the fact that, you know, mailboxes and mail sorting machines are disappearing, and think about the noise that people made, and think about the fact that suddenly that was a public issue. Did it solve the problem? No. Did it make it an issue? Yes. And that was just based on the aggressive voicing of public opinion. Constant, aggressive social media, speeches, TV, people came forward and said, wait a minute, really loudly. And whoever has power, however much they want to claim or use power and prevent others from having it, the fact of the matter is, in our government right now, the public still controls who has power. That's testimony to that. So if you think all the way back about healthcare, think about the big stink people put up when healthcare first was up for debate. And I know I was on Twitter all the time saying, you know, call your member of Congress, you know, contact them every day, like fill their phone lines with protests about how you demand health coverage, right? And that was a big stink. And then there was some backpedaling. I'm not saying that making a loud noise solves things, but I am saying that making a loud noise matters and can push towards a better resolution. So we, getting back to we are the nation. Our opinion matters. We, as a we, can really have an impact. And to forget all of that is to really forget about the heart of democracy and to give up hope. Now, we've come together now for 25 weeks, which I honestly can't believe. And in the process, we have created a kind of we. I know I've said that more than once in a kind of, I don't know, mushy, sentimental something that I say at the end of these Thursday morning discussions, you know, we've created a community, but we have, right? I know many of you, I look for many of you, I welcome all the new people, but I certainly recognize many people's names. You know, it's nice to see. So there is a we, a sense of a we here. We've been joining together with purpose to talk about what matters, to think about how we can deal with this situation, and in a sense, to show our willingness to work for a good solution, to create a we. So I guess my sort of takeaway here, I know I want to open things up for questions, is that we can foster the fuel of hope and use it to keep going, not surrendering to threats and not surrendering to things that haven't happened, but instead defending democracy by remembering that we're a community, by joining with others to express our willingness to stand behind democracy, to think about how we're going to do that, but more equally important, to come together so that we can remind each other that there's a we, there's a big we, and together we can affect change, and that creates hope. So I fundamentally do think that hope is a fundamental part of the mechanism of democracy. Democracy is a contest. We don't know what's going to happen. And hope is what fuels you to engage in the contest. So don't surrender hope. I know it's really easy for me to say this, and it's hard for me to sometimes think it, right? There's a reason why I'm not sleeping really well, and I know a lot of you aren't either. That said, I think we need to be strong for each other and have hope and think about affecting change, think about pushing for what we want, and come together to do that. In the long term of American history, ground up organization has affected big change. So again, we matter, you matter, and I won't be as sort of sentimental as I normally am, but the small we matters too, right? Because I think in having this conversation, ideally you can go off and spread whatever you're pulling from this with others, and small circles become big circles, and big circles can have an impact. Okay. I realize that's different from what I normally do. I didn't necessarily pull out documents, and a lot of what I was saying was very general, but I needed to think about saying that, and I'm hoping that some of you needed to hear that and think about it too. It feels like such a dire time. I think it's an important moment to not cave into that. Now, the mug. Okay, so some of you are probably new. Every week for 25 weeks, I try to present a mug at the end of my comments that is thematically tied to whatever I'm talking about. And today I have managed to do that because of one of you. And I don't know, so some people have been kind enough to send me mugs, which I greatly appreciate. The problem is I don't know who sends them, right? I get a box and it has some mugs in it. I'm like, yay, this is so nice. We're a community, right? Look at that. People are contributing. So I got this mug, and if someone happens to be watching who sent this, please pipe up. When I got it, I thought, I'm not sure how I'm going to weave that in to a discussion of history. And lo and behold, here we are. It's a mug that says on it, creative, optimistic, energetic. And there we are, right? Hope. Creative, optimistic, energetic. That's in a sense what I've been calling for this morning. I did not predict that this mug would be this directly on message at any point. And I think the fact that it is kind of a sign that we needed to have this conversation this morning. So that's the mug takeaway message, is to be in the moment, act in the moment, live in the moment, and push ahead. Accept the threat and then fight it. Okay, now I will shut up and turn things over to Matt for the Q&A portion of what we're discussing.
Well, that's, first of all, great mug.
I know, whoever did, someone out there sent this to me. So pipe up if you're out there, because I would love to thank you.
And second of all, I just on the subject of community, because before I forget about it,
One thing, Donna.
Oh, go ahead.
Donna, it's her mug. Donna.
Oh, Donna, yes, of course.
Donna, thank you. I'm loving the mug, and honestly, who knew how timely this would be? I'm sorry. Now go back to you, Matt.
No, it's fine. I was just gonna say, just this idea of community. I think this is really great. I got the chance to meet some folks that are regular viewers this week. We have several regular viewers who are now on our teacher advisory committee at NCHE. And I just want to say it publicly, it was really nice to see faces and chat with them, and they're lovely human beings. So
wow, I'm jealous.
I thought you, and as I tweeted, you were getting a lot of love that night. So it was
the we.
The we.
Salute the we.
And with that, I will, we do have a lot of questions. So, but
I hope I can answer them, because this is such a big topic, and
it is. I'm
a historian and not an activist in a sense. So, but anyway, I'm open. Let's go.
And I'm hoping I can ask a lot of these, given sort of the world we live in. But as always, again, please put these into Q&A if you have questions. Otherwise, you get stuck with my questions, which is my weekly threat. Let's see. Tom, from the time the U.S. could reasonably be called a democracy, at whatever point in the 19th century that might be, when else has democratic government been imperiled as it is today? And I'm using his words, not mine. The Civil War is one obvious answer. Are there others?
Well, okay. So as a historian, I have a natural opposition to saying never before. Right? I mean, it is like against, like my personal constitution protests against saying never before. And I always tell my students, if they write in a paper, this has never happened before, or this is unique, 90% of the time they're wrong. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, I won't say that democracy has never been challenged in American history. It's been challenged in different ways, and depends on how you define democracy, right? If you're talking about our constitutional process of government, there have been a number of times when that has happened. What I've said before about crises and moments of extreme polarization that feel like this moment is that history can teach us about those moments and how they transpired, but no two are the same. So, you know, the crises that are unfolding all have an original combination of things that add up to whatever's going on. And that's true now as well as in the past. The combination of things we're facing right now is definitely distinctive. Different aspects of it we've seen before. We haven't seen this kind of a president making these kinds of threats so openly this way before. And by these kinds of threats, I mean, essentially, who cares about the election? We don't need all the ballots. It's just going to continue. That's pretty extreme. Which is not to say other people in the past have not made equal threats, but what I will say is the particular combination of things that are creating our moment of crisis, and, you know, toss into that everything else, the pandemic, the sort of opposition about the pandemic, all of the things, the blatant in-your-face kind of racist rhetoric and action, and the fact that more people than ever, certainly more white people than ever, are stepping forward to talk about that. There's a blend of things right now that is, you know, I think all the time about 50 years from now, people looking back and trying to talk about this moment. I think about it all the time because, you know, I can't even imagine. But that's a long way of saying, has this precise moment happened before? No. Have there been moments when the democratic process has been threatened? Yes. I mean, just even think about Jim Crow, right? I mean, yes, there are moments when the democratic process has been threatened. There are moments then that have tried to correct that, you know, civil rights acts. So it's not an easy answer. I can't say yes or no. What I can say is versions of it have happened before, but there has not been a version that's precisely like this one.
Tom, your second question is a great one. I'm going to hold off on it because let's see. I apologize. I'm trying to filter these a little bit because we do, and those of you who are new, we do try to stay sort of middle of the road here and think about things in a more historical fashion. But given the content of today, I'm trying to phrase questions in a way that would be non-polemic because it's Thursday and apparently I can't come up with words that are real, so I'm using non-polemic. And I don't know who this person is. B. Garrity, I'm not sure, asks, how do we encourage more people to actively participate in democracy, even when times are good? Excuse me. History teaches us that engagement matters all of the time. How do we rely on danger or do we have to rely on danger to motivate us?
Wow. So that's a big question. And the ideal answer is no, we should not have to rely on danger. You know, I think about this a lot, which I guess tells you more about me than anything else. But one of the, and I know I've mentioned it at some point in 25 weeks. When I think about this question, think about Thomas Jefferson. And I think about him because one of the things he said frequently was that the reason education was important in our form of government is that people needed to be educated enough to recognize threats when they come, to understand threats, and to be willing to step forward. So, you know, he's saying it's not a matter of waiting until there's a threat and then sort of expecting things to happen, that people need to fundamentally understand the government, the nation, how it works, and then what threatens it. I think it's easy to say, whatever happened to civics courses? Well, there are some civics courses, and whenever someone on Twitter says, whatever happened to civics courses, people always step forward and say, wait a minute, I teach civics. I do think that generally speaking in the American population, there is a lack of understanding about a lot of really basic things about our government. I am not going to be able to sit here and offer the solution to that. I think, you know, in the National Council for History Education, there can be a conversation about education and history and the democratic process and how we instill that and what we do to teach that and give it real meaning. But I do think it's important to think about our students. You know, it's important to teach them not just here's what the Constitution is and here's what it says, but how it's played out and what it means, how people have taken action based on it. You know, I taught my undergrad seminar from yesterday. We were talking about the politics of the street in the 1790s, and we were talking about protest, public protest, which then led us to talk about public protest is a fundamental part of democracy. We had that conversation, people had questions, that was worth saying, right? And it wasn't encouraging people to do anything, it was just driving that message home. And I think it's easy, apparently easy, to forget that, you know, to forget some fundamental rights that we have assumed are so fundamental we've forgotten that they're rights. So that's another long-winded answer, but it's a way of saying that somehow or other, and part of it, the answer is going to be education. We need to drive home the importance and the meaning and the personal connection with some of these things, and education can help to do that. And civics classes can help to do that, but I think history classes can do that in a different way, and I think that's important.
Excuse me, Lun asks this question about the word coup, which we use today. And the question is, hasn't the term coup also been misused right along with other ism words? And I would just sort of add to this question, you know, because you talked about how language matters, right? And I totally agree. So maybe an add-on to this question then is, what are some strategies from a historical perspective can we think about to combat sort of the misuse of common terms in, you know, or hyperbolic terms even?
Well, so one answer to that, an easy answer to that, is precisely what I did, which I read you a dictionary definition of what a coup is. You'll notice, if those who follow me on Twitter, that very often the first thing I'll do when I'm confronting an issue is to give a dictionary definition. Or if I'm confronting, I don't know, a rule or a process or something, the first thing I will do is quote a formal, and ideally from a really formal, you know, government agency or the Oxford English Dictionary or some really formal authoritative source, what the actual it is. It's not going to solve the problem, but it's a great starting point. And I think people don't necessarily do that. So yeah, coup, absolutely, you're right, can mean a lot of things. People have been using it for all kinds of reasons and have been suggesting, which is part of what I was hitting against today, we are in the middle of a coup. Well, it isn't happening yet, and we shouldn't assume that yet. It could, but what we should be doing is taking action in the moment and not assuming that a coup is people making threats about a coup. You know what I mean? So I think we need to stop. I mean, I know I've said this before, so I know I'm repeating myself, but when people throw these words around, and coup is a great example of that, as I've said week after week, pause for a moment and think about the word. Don't just think about the threat. Think about the word. And you know, there's a reason why I made my list, you know, authoritarianism, fascism, Nazism. The same thing happened in the 1790s, right? That people threw these words at each other. Aristocrat, revolutionary, French revolutionary, Jacobin, monarchist. The words had meaning, but the way they were throwing them at each other, they were just like, you're bad. And that's kind of how people tend to be using them now. I think starting by talking about what they actually mean, and then thinking about what that means in the current moment. You know, I don't, along the same lines, I don't think it's useful to compare current leaders with leaders of the past and say they're equal.
Right.
I don't think that's useful. And I think that suggests that what's happening in the moment actually kind of isn't us. It just is a thing that happens now and again. And here it is happening again. No, what's happening now has long roots, but we're also part of it. So that's not an easy answer, but part of the answer is always start with basics. And that's actually, as a historian, I do that all the time. If you look at some of my published work, you'll see that when there's a word that people are using that strikes me as interesting or that is used a lot, the first thing I'll do is look it up in the OED and sometimes Oxford English Dictionary, and then sometimes I'll have a footnote that quotes it precisely. Because what matters is, number one, what it really means, and number two, equally important, how people who are using the word at the time thought about it. So in my case, I need to know what democracy meant in 1790. Right? I need to know what things meant at a different time period. But as sort of goofily simple as it sounds, thinking about specific words and meanings and coming forward and saying, actually, this is what this means. There are going to be people who don't care. about whether you say that or not, but there are going to be other people who are going to pause for a moment and think, oh, well, now what do I think?
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop there. I'll stop there.
Oh, excellent. Very, very helpful. I want to ask, so I'm going to divert off our topic for just a couple quick questions. Abigail is still here, so I want to make sure to ask this question, and I want to make sure to ask it because we need in academia to support our grad students, our PhD students, who work incredibly hard, and it's getting your PhD is incredibly difficult, and so I want to support her by asking her question, which is, hi, I am a PhD student, and work is more difficult than ever because of the world, and I think this is like a sweeping hand, because of the world, you know?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on writing and research right now?
Wow. Okay. That's a really good and really important question. I will admit I'm having a really hard time researching and writing right now.
Totally. Yeah.
And I kick myself a lot, right? I tend to say to myself, like, Freeman. I always call myself Freeman when I'm mad at myself. Freeman, you know, you gotta prepare for class. You have an article that's due on Tuesday. I do have an article that's due on Tuesday. You have whatever's coming up. And the fact of the matter is, some people are managing to move ahead brilliantly, and all power to them, but I think probably most of us can't. I think we're distracted and anxious. I think for me, some emotional part of me that goes into my work is now occupied doing other things. So I can't engage with my work the same way. I would say a couple of things. So, and this is what I tell myself. I don't think I'm going to have the absolute answer. I'm giving myself full permission to not be effective. You know, I'm not saying, Joanne, you don't have to do anything, but I am saying, you know what? You're going to be watching more TV than you should, and that's okay. You're going to be working less. You're going to be missing some deadlines. You're going to be doing work that is not 100% of what you can do, and all of that is fine. I think you need to find a way, and by you, I mean you asking the question and us generally, need to find a way to accomplish the basic things that need to get done without smacking ourselves over the head about the fact that we're not doing them brilliantly or perfectly or wonderfully, and to acknowledge the fact that some things aren't going to get done. And the fact of the matter is, I've found more often than not, when I don't do something or when something is really late, given the world, people are pretty understanding at this moment too. So give yourself permission, be nice to yourself in this moment. Do things that give you comfort, whatever that means. Talking to people, Zooming with people, eating things, watching TV, which somehow or other has become my thing to turn off my brain, is this is like true confessions to you, the history community. I'm just binge watching entire series because I get caught up in the plot and I don't think about anything else. And so one thing leads into another, and for a while, I'm kind of calmed down. And that's something I would never tell a grad student to do under normal circumstances, and that I would never do myself under normal circumstances. These are not normal circumstances. So give yourself permission not to be great, right? Give yourself permission and talk to the people you're working with and for, right? If you're a grad student and you're working with professors, tell them you're having a hard time, you know, which is not to say like, ooh, I'm not good for the program. Say, given the current climate, this is quite a challenge. Ask that person what you just asked me. What do you suggest? Odds are that person is going to say, yeah, I'm having a hard time too. But the fact of the matter is, I've seen this in Twitter conversations too. Professors and teachers beaming out again and again, you know, students, you need to tell us you're having a hard time, right? Don't be afraid to tell us you're having a hard time. I think people are afraid to, and, you know, I'm so relieved when a student comes forward and says, here's why I haven't been here, or here's why, whatever. It's like, okay, I understand, and we're going to figure it out, and you're okay, and life is fine, and we're going to get past this, and this isn't a normal moment. Again, I'm very good at long-winded answers this morning, but these are hard topics. The most important thing I would say is just be nice to yourself and acknowledge the fact that you will not be doing great work necessarily. You will not be finishing everything. You will be doing less than you wish you could do. You will be doing things that feel irresponsible or goofy, and all of that is okay.
Yeah.
I hope that.
I would totally second that. I might even add, don't try to write something or research something or do something sort of every day like you normally would, knowing full well that it's going to probably basically be garbage, and it's going to go into your that file that we all have, which is stuff I wrote that I'm never going to return to. But I'm too much of an academic to get rid of it. Like put it in that file, but just keep plugging, because that's how we get out, who we are as scholars. And so,
and I'll add to that too. Note the times when you tend to be more productive than others, right? I've discovered that basically between 9 and 11, or however early I can get up until about 11, is a window when if I'm able to work, I can work, because I don't allow myself to look at Twitter, and I don't check my email, and I just sit down and I do stuff, and then the day weighs in on me and I can't work anymore. So that's my formula for at least getting something done. Not as much as I want to, but something. So pay attention to what your psyche and your body are telling you too. And yes, I see naps appearing. Naps are a fine thing. I have become a master of naps.
Yes.
Be nice to yourself, whatever that means to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too. Find a time that works for you. And those times change. Like when I was in grad school, it was, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. was like my sweet spot. And now I am, now I'm like at 10 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon kind of sweet spot. So
I used to be an all-nighter or close to that person too. And
I can't do it anymore.
I could, but not on a sustained basis. But the fact is, and this relates to that question, I'm so exhausted all the time right now that when I was finishing my last book, I could wake up at 6 in the morning, get to my desk and work. And now I can't get out of bed. It takes me an hour to get out of bed because I'm so tired. And I give myself permission to do that too. And I also set alarm clocks all over my apartment so that if I ignore the one close to my bed, I have to get up to. But give yourself permission.
Yes. And that's actually, Alana mentions in the chat here about even those of you who are not academics and just history lovers, and, take the time to be kind to yourself and do things that are, off Twitter, off Facebook, and do something interesting. Go read The Crisis by Thomas Paine later today. Spend a half hour reading, because it's actually a fairly long speech, which is
but it's actually, because it's Paine, it's written in a very straightforward manner. And it's really, I reread it when I was preparing for this morning. He's really conversational. I was with the troops and here's what I saw, and so yeah, go read The American Crisis. I see Grace has appeared.
I'd say Grace has appeared. Grace, do you want to?
I just beamed in.
Hi.
I usually watch on my personal account, so I don't mess you up. But since it's your 25th episode, Joanne, I did just want to pop in and thank you. And just say how awesome this is. And I'm Grace. I'm the executive director of the National Council for History Education. So I just wanted to pop in and thank Joanne. I think it's really remarkable how at a time when everybody's so separate, you've created a community here. Like I said, I am always lurking on the edge, watching everybody's chats and seeing everybody talk, and it's just a lovely thing to watch. So thank you for creating something so positive. And I did also just want to say, just to everybody out there who's having a rough time, just especially since I'm working on writing something right now that's, I'm taking a long time to write things too. But there's a lot of talk about patriotic education lately, and I did just want to say to history educators how much we appreciate everything you do for our country and teaching our students how to analyze documents and teaching about the fundamentals of civics and everything you do, and teaching about all the different people in this country. So we did just want to thank you for everything that you're doing out there. It's amazing. So even when you need lots of naps or watching anime or whatever everybody else is putting in the chat, you're just doing phenomenal work, and we're blown away every day by what history educators are doing, including Joanne. So thank you all.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you for your part in what National Council for History Education does. I'm thrilled to be doing this every week. I'm beyond thrilled that we have a community, and I'm so pleased and honored to be doing that with you folks. So, people, I just saw someone say, "We remember Grace." Yes, Grace took Matt's place, so Grace is.
Yeah, I pop in and out periodically. And like many of you, there's so much going on right now.
Yes.
So
Cute.
further shout out to parenting history educators.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. For sure.
Grace and I have plenty of meetings where our children are heavily involved in the conversations.
we have met yours, Matt.
It's true. My mind several times. All right. Well, we are about out of time. So if Joanne, do you want to wrap us up for the day? And thank you, everybody. We'll do the after party here in a minute, and then we'll try to get to some of those other questions.
Okay. So wrapping us up. Wow. That was, we talked about some pretty important things there. I guess I will wrap it up by saying, I want to say keep hope alive, and then that puts me right back in a partisan place. But I will say, this is a moment that just invites despair, and it's okay to be upset and it's okay to be angry. But I think it's such an important moment for us to be aware of ourselves, aware of our history, aware of the importance of what's happening now, and of our importance in having an impact on what is happening. As a history teacher, you know, it's part of why I'm coming out in the open so often, is I just think it's a moment when history teachers of all kinds need to step forward and talk about what our country has been, what it is, and what it can be. And there's no way to understand that unless you're studying history in its entirety, not a little part of it. So I will end right there. I will also say, I'm sending history vibes to everyone out there watching, to the history community. And I wish you guys all have a good week in which you take care of yourself. And I will figure out sometime before a week from now what our topic will be next week.
Thanks, everybody.